Okay. Well, we'll jump right into it. Stephen Dupont, APR fellow PRSA, is here to talk to us about incorporating a futuristic mindset into planning and programs, and I believe he has his own intro.
Sounds good. Thank you, Drew. Hey, everybody. Drew, you're down in St. Louis, right?
Yes, sir.
And I see we've got folks from Omaha and Madison and the Twin Cities here. So I think that's one of the cool things about Zoom, that we can all be together from all different parts of the country to learn about something new. So hi, everybody. I'm Stephen Dupont, and I'm going to be turning off my camera here. I've looked at myself enough today on Zoom, frankly. And I'm going to do the presentation, and then I plan to check the chat for questions a couple times throughout. But I will definitely do a Q&A after I'm done, and that's when I'll turn off my presentation, my PowerPoint here, and I'll go full video again. But welcome to everybody, and I'm looking forward to talking to you today. And I'm going to now shut off my video, and here we go. I think we've got everything working here. No, maybe not. Oh, there we go. I don't know why it does that. So welcome, everybody. Again, I'm Stephen Dupont, APR fellow PRSA, and I am VP of Public Relations and Branded Content here at Pocket Hercules. We're a creative firm here in the Twin Cities area. I've had a long involvement with PRSA. I became a member back in 1988, which dates me. And I've served as the president of the Minnesota chapter. I've entered my fair share of awards. In addition to PRSA, I'm a member of IABC and the Association of Professional Futurists and the Outdoor Writers Association of America. And you may or may not have read some of the articles I've written over the years for Strategies and Tactics. And I consider myself also a professional futurist. I'm actually in the master's program for foresight at the University of Houston's College of Technology. Before we jump in, just wanted to point out a couple things for you. In the October issue of Strategies and Tactics, I wrote an article called Looking 20 Years into PR's Future. You might find that of interest. And I invite you to join me in February 2022 for a webinar I'm going to be giving called Seeing Around Corners, Trends and Events that Public Relations Professionals Should Keep Their Eyes on in 2022. And from time to time, PRSA Learning makes available some of my other webinars. I think I've done at least a dozen webinars now for PRSA National, and you're more than invited to see them or look them up. I don't know if they're available, but if you are a PRSA member, they are free of charge. So let's get started. I can't visually tell you, I can't see you right now, but imagine closing your eyes just for a minute and thinking ahead to the year 2036. Doesn't that seem so far away? Actually, it's only 15 years away. So how old will you be? What do you think you're going to be doing for work? Are you still in PR? Is PR still PR in 2036? It's going to be an election year. Who do you think you're going to be voting for president? Are we going to be voting for president in the year 2036? What are you most hopeful for? What do you fear the most for the year 2036? Throw your comments in the chat. That'd be kind of cool to see. Give it some thought, and as thoughts come up during this presentation, put your questions, your thoughts into the chat. So that's kind of what we're trying to do today here, is think ahead. And it's not just for yourself, but also for the organizations that you represent. It's amazing to me how fast time really does seem to go. And what I'm inviting you to today is to think like a futurist. So what are we going to cover? I'm going to share with you some questions about the future, some things to think about. I'm going to invite you to learn what a futurist mindset is, and then how to develop a futurist mindset, give you some thoughts about how to do that, and then how to apply it to your work as a public relations professional. And I'm also going to share some thoughts with you about your career, about what you should do now to prepare for 2036. As public relations professionals, I really believe that as communicators, we are the keepers of trust and truth for our organizations. And to do that effectively, we must be people who raise the difficult questions. And that's what being a futurist is about sometimes, is raising tough questions. And as storytellers, we must navigate the legacies that we have created and the legacies that we want to create for the organizations we represent. And that's why we need to think like futurists. So here's why you need to think like a futurist. First off, because we need more business people to do this. If we want our country to remain competitive in the world, we need more people to think ahead and anticipate the changes ahead. As a country, we often react to crisis situations, whereas in China, I spoke recently to an author of a book about Chinese millennials. They have a mindset that thinks out decades ahead. Second, developing a futurist mindset will help you deepen your expertise as a communicator. And as we enter the age of artificial intelligence and androids, we need more creative, strategic thinkers who know how to communicate well. I think it's a skill. Communicating well is a skill that's going to do well for us. It's not many people, it's hard for people to learn how to do that skill well. And I think it's something that humans will continue to keep doing. So in other words, there's long-term job security for communicators who know how to build and maintain trust in an ever-changing world. So I want to first start off with some questions that professional futurists are thinking about. These are questions that I think you might want to consider as you look at your own work. The reason why I feel a sense of urgency around the topic of developing a futurist mindset is best summed up in this quote by Tom Friedman, a writer with the New York Times. The three largest forces on our planet, technology, globalization, and climate change, are all accelerating at the same time. Gray Scott, a futurist in New York City that I interviewed for an article in Strategies and Tactics, warned, most people are not ready for the changes that are coming. And I'd like to ask you, are you ready? Are the people at your organization ready? Your clients ready? So what got me into this? Why have I become so passionate about thinking like a futurist? Well, I have to tell you, I've always loved reading science fiction books such as Dune, or seeing movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey. And as a public relations professional, I have relied on trends to generate editorial exposure for my clients or to create content to generate marketing leads for my clients. But I think what really put this on my radar screen was a conversation that my wife and I had a few years ago with our two daughters at the dinner table. We were talking about SpaceX and, exploration of, going to the moon and Mars, and that movie, The Martian. We had recently seen it. And my oldest daughter, who is now 21, said, if I could go to Mars, I would. I want to live on Mars. And I asked, even if that meant never coming back to Earth and seeing dear old mom and dad? And she said, absolutely. I want to be the first generation of Martians. And for some reason, that really hit me, and it made me think, with what time I have left, what is it that I really want to do? And when I turn 60 or 80 or 100, what will I, or what will me and my wife together, what will we be doing and where will we be living? So it was kind of amazing to me that my teenage daughter at that time had this vision for herself in the future. And this is Anna. And she is now a college student out in the Seattle area, and she's studying biology. And her dream after college is to start an organic farm in northern Minnesota where they grow fruits and vegetables inside. I think she's getting ready for Mars. So when I started to ask that question, it led to more questions and more questions about our future. And now I can't help but see change all around us. Big changes, small changes, but changes that are reshaping our society and our workplace and how you and I will live in the years and decades to come. Changes like the incredible influence that artificial intelligence will have in our workplaces. According to the McKinsey Global Institute, artificial intelligence and software automation will eliminate more than 30% of today's existing jobs in just the US alone by 2030. That's 70 million jobs, folks. For example, news organizations are already experimenting with artificial intelligence to write basic news stories about sports or stocks, for example. You go to your local grocery store. The automation is on full display right there. They're teaching us to do the checkout ourselves, right? One store employee watching, 6 to 8 customers doing the checkouts there, and you see the long line of empty checkout stations with maybe 1 or 2 cashiers there. That's what automation is doing. Here's another question for you to consider. Is your organization ready to start hiring robots or androids like Sophia here? And are you ready to start working side by side them? Or are you ready to work with an android like this promising, handsome fella from Boston Dynamics? Here they are testing out this robot in the woods of Massachusetts. Can you imagine one day a robot like this or an android patrolling our streets, doing crowd control at a big event, patrolling a small town in another country? It's part of the military. The US military is already employing robot dogs from Boston Dynamics as part of their efforts, and the police and some police departments too. So this is not fantasy. It is happening. No doubt you've heard of cryptocurrencies. And we've all heard about the ups and downs of crypto. I think Bitcoin last week, I checked the prices. Bitcoin was $68,000. I remember I had the chance to buy Bitcoin back in 2011, I think, for $6. A friend said, you got to buy Bitcoin. I kind of missed the boat on that one. But Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and there are hundreds of them, are becoming very real. China is experimenting. They might come out with their own cryptocurrency. Some of the big banks are thinking about it, and companies, are thinking about accepting payment for crypto. Some companies, like my own firm that I work with, we give our employees the option of accepting bonuses in crypto. So is your organization thinking about this? Because this is another fundamental change that's happening right before our eyes. Imagine that as we age, we can replace body parts as we wear out. We already can, such as knees and hips. But imagine organs that are grown or printed. And imagine this, the average lifespan moving up from 100 years to 100, or moving up from 75, 80 years old to 100 or 120 years. Your average career lifespan is about 43 years, based on a typical, retiring at about 65? What if your career was 63 or 80 years long? Can you imagine that? What would you do with all that time? For years, the automobile industry has been one of the key industries that has driven the US economy. Imagine rechargeable electric flying cars with no tires. Imagine what that would do to an economy built on combustible engines and rubber tires. Imagine our cities being reconfigured for flying vehicles. Tokyo is looking at this very issue. I have a friend who is a transportation director for the city of Toronto. They are actually thinking about this. Imagine traffic lanes in the sky or above you, maybe 400 feet, as people are walking on the sidewalks below. Has your company thought about the implications of water? Considering the rise in sea levels and the devastating effects of hurricanes and coastal communities, should your company move? Some of you may not believe, I'm just making this assumption, even though I should not assume. Maybe you don't believe in climate change, or maybe you don't believe in how severe it is. But the insurance companies and the real estate markets do. They are planning on building a wall around Miami, Florida, right now. And there are plans in place to start building seawalls around New York City. I just spoke with an urban designer in New York City who's part of that project. As reported by the Washington Post, a 500-page environmental impact statement issued by the National Highway Traffic Administration in July 2018, 4 years ago, makes the assumption, in other words, a forecast, that the planet's average temperature will rise 7 degrees by 2100. Folks, most organizations and governments are planning on a rise of 1.5 to 2.6 degrees. The UN conference in Scotland, for example, that's the prevalent thinking. But there are some scientists, and here a government agency, that are thinking it could become much worse. How about this question? Would your company offer or mandate that its employees have a chip inserted under their skin to prevent cybersecurity threats? One company in Wisconsin did several years ago. Would your company jump at a chance to put its logo on the first spaceship traveling to Mars, or sponsor one of the first infrastructure projects in Mars? You know, the first highway, or the first, the first stadium on Mars. NASA is open to that idea. And of course, we have to talk about this change, the metaverse. The concept of metaverse goes back actually to Neil Stephenson's book, Snow Crash, back in 1992. Facebook, now called Meta, did a press conference about a week or 2 weeks ago, talking about their plans to create a metaverse. And so this is a change that, that came out of science fiction writing a couple decades ago that is now becoming a reality. And can you imagine us having this meeting? Each of us have our own animated characters interacting and listening to a presentation like we are right now from anywhere in the world. Do you work in education? Are you thinking about the future of enrollments? Well, during the COVID-19 pandemic, births in the US dropped more than 6%. And there are many couples nowadays that are putting off starting families because they're worried about climate change. So the statistics, the demographic statistics, are already baked in to the future of education. The future of education in the US is already here. There will be fewer students in the years to come. There will be more diversity in those classrooms. The future's there already. And so if you're in higher education or even in elementary or secondary education, you can see what might be coming in the next 5 years when those first kids go to kindergarten, or the next 15 or 20 years when those alpha gens, which is what they're called today, start entering college. A few years ago, and you can Google this, a Chinese man sought permission to marry a robot that he had built himself. Well, this raises a much bigger question, or questions. If marriages are built on contracts, would a robot powered by artificial intelligence, able to make its own decisions, that married a human, have the same rights to own property, or to vote, or to adopt children, or to receive Social Security benefits because they work in a PR office? So I just wanted to give you a flavor of some of the questions that real futurists struggle with. And now I'd like to talk to you about what a futurist mindset is. Here's the issue. Most of us really don't want to think about the future. This statistic kind of says it all from the Institute of the Future in Silicon Valley. We take class after class to study history from elementary school through college, but there are no classes where we study the future or where we challenge our young people to think about the future. Think about that. So for this presentation, I have been interviewing futurists across the world, some of the leading futurists in the world of foresight. People like Andy Hines, who leads the master's program in foresight at the University of Houston. Peter Bishop, who's founded that program 35 years ago, and many other futurists. James Canton, an author and futurist, he has a very compelling, several very compelling books about extreme futures, looking ahead, 60 to 100 years from now. And I'd like to share with you some of the observations that I've gleaned from these conversations. So when we talk about the future, most futurists look at it from a minimum of 5 years to 100 years out, okay? And they approach change by looking at how people react to change. And to any given future, there are people who are in denial of change, who actively resist change, who grudgingly accept change, okay? And those who accelerate change. And let me give you a good example of something that I noticed earlier this year. General Motors announced that it is going to stop making gas-powered cars in the year 2035. But the change that I'm really watching for is what GM and Ford are going to do next year. They're literally taking action on that future. They're going to be introducing all kinds of electric vehicles. And Ford is going to be introducing the F-150 series, which is the best-selling car and truck in the US, in an electric battery-powered format next year. In fact, they were up in War Road, Minnesota. It's a small town on the Minnesota-Canadian border of rural Minnesota, testing out their new F-150 and getting people to try it, getting into those trucks and driving it around. So that's how we think about futures and how we approach change. And this is what futurists are concerned about. What else separates a futurist mindset? Well, futurists have the courage to ask questions of themselves and others that haven't been asked. They are not afraid to unlearn what they've been taught. So, for example, there's such a big deal about electric cars coming in this whole wave of electric vehicles. Well, did you know back in the turn of the century, a third of all the cars on the roads back then were already electric? And So what happened there? Well, obviously the interests of oil and gas got involved to kind of focus our nation on gas-powered vehicles. But it's interesting that we rarely are, I don't recall ever being taught that in my classes of history, of American history. And yet here we are, we're looking at the future and the future of electric vehicles and automated vehicles changing American transportation. It was already there. Futurists would argue that they do not fantasize about the future, but rather their job is to bring critical analysis to futures that may be, and some of these might be fantasies, but futurists are there to look at those, fantastical visions, like the vision of a metaverse, and say, is that a possible reality? Futurists believe there is not one future. There are many futures ahead. And, let's say we were looking at the future of US infrastructure 30 years from now, the year 2050. Many futurists would break it down into 4 types of futures. A future where we just keep doing what we're doing right now. We kind of fund our infrastructure. A second future might be a complete collapse of our infrastructure. A third one might be a new paradigm where maybe that infrastructure is, we accept some new form of technology like electric vehicles. And then a fourth one might be a transformational future, like something that is so maybe far out there that no one really, guessed that it was coming, but it is a new reality. For example, on that, today we are all talking about the future of energy and about wind power and solar power replacing coal and natural gas powered power plants, right? Well, what if there was a future technology such as solar, space solar, where we're setting up solar power plants in orbit around the Earth to capture the sun and it's beamed down to power plants or substations here on Earth? That's not that far out. Our military actually looked into that possibly 25 years ago. And China says that they are trying to develop their own solar space station, or their own space solar power plant, I should say, and have it up in orbit by the year 2030. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is sometimes the future can look pretty negative, but futurists always advocate for positive futures and look for the opportunities that many don't see yet. Futurists don't assume. For example, I kind of asked you earlier, who would you vote for in the year 2036? Well, futurists would say, well, let's not assume that we are having free elections in the United States anymore in the year 2036. I know that might be hard to believe, but is it really? Futurists believe that change is ever present. And right now, in this room, I am introducing you to change. I'm advocating for you to think differently about futures, right? Several years ago, the Houston City Council voted down a proposal by a Canadian company to open the very first sex bot brothel in Houston. Can you believe this? It's a real story. Yeah, I did not make this up. So they turned it down, but I want to ask you, do you think that's really going to go away? I mean, really? It's going to pop up somewhere else. And that's a future I don't necessarily welcome, but it is there. It's happening. Change is big and small. Sometimes you notice it, sometimes you don't. Hello? Does somebody have their voice on? Okay. Futurists anticipate change. For example, France has banned the sales of cars with combustion engines in the year 2040. California is calling for a ban of all gas-powered lawnmowers by the year 2024. This just happened a few weeks ago. So if this pattern continues, and that's what futurists do, they look for patterns, and you can too. This means that in the next 5 to 20 years, all types of gas-powered vehicles will go away. Not just cars, not just lawnmowers, but ATVs, boat engines, trains, airplanes. I just read a story today about a new form of hydrogen storage that might allow for hydrogen-powered airplanes, which would allow us to stop using, jet fuel, which is emits a lot of pollution into our atmosphere. So how do you think that if you were working for an oil and gas company, how do you think all these changes would affect you and your company, or the auto manufacturing industry, or convenience stores? Imagine all the times we stop at a convenience store to fill up our cars today. What will that look like in 10 or 15 years? Will we even stop at them to charge up our battery-powered cars anymore? Futurists understand that you cannot eliminate all risks. You can only reduce risks through strategic foresight and proper planning. Futurists collaborate with others because the more minds working on a problem are better than just one mind. Futurists are not in the game of making predictions. Instead, we're in the game of creating forecasts, not of absolutes, but of possibilities. And many, if not all, futurists believe that future thinking belongs to all, that we all need to think like futurists. My final observation about how futurists think is that futurists do believe in action. We're not just here to put out, these descriptions, these visions of what could be. We believe that we have the power to change the course of events. And we have a responsibility of acting on especially plausible things that we know that could happen. In other words, we deserve the futures that we get. Remember the mantra of Spider-Man: with great power, as in futures thinking, comes great responsibility. So I'd like to share some thoughts about how to develop that futures mindset. A futures mindset, I believe, consists of three things. It's this incredible passion for curiosity, plus critical thinking, plus empathy, that emotion, that understanding of how people think and feel. And that is what combined creates the futures mind. As I mentioned, futurists don't see one future. They see the worst possible futures and the best possible futures. The critical thinker within them knows that the actual future probably lies somewhere in between. For example, if our planet's average temperature rises 7 degrees in 80 years, for most of us, in 80 years, for most of us, all we can think of is all the really bad stuff that's going to happen to us and our children and our grandchildren. But a futurist might look at that and see, you know what, there are some positives in that. I don't know what they are, but they might look at that. Futurists do study history to visualize what's next, to not only look for patterns, but to see is future in a way repeating itself, like that example of the electric cars. To develop your futures mindset, I strongly encourage you to read and watch movies about the future, including science fiction. Here in the screen here are some really great books I would recommend. And I believe it's important for us to learn from those who are bold enough to imagine different futures. Here's a funny example. Remember the Jetsons cartoon, from the 1960s? 50 years ago, that show, George and his wife Jane are having conversations through a video screen with other people, doing exactly what you and I are doing right now with Zoom. Can you imagine the writers sitting around in a room, creating ideas for that show and brainstorming? What do you think the future is going to look like? What will George and Jane be doing? Flying cars, video cameras, Rosie the robot cleaning your house. Kind of eerie. It's actually, we're almost there on a lot of these different things. In our line of work, we often identify with doing B2B or B2C public relations, or government public relations, or education public relations. But the reality from a futurist mindset perspective is that we practice human-to-human relations. As noted by Brian Kramer, a well-known business strategist, we must never forget that the future is not going to be defined by technology. We often think that all these fantastic things like a Zoom or flying cars, but it's still about humans. And that's why we as communicators are challenged to bring relevance and context to the changes our customers and other stakeholders are experiencing or will experience in the future. So this leads me to the key practice of futurists. They spend a lot of intentional time visualizing. And I liken this to the practice of meditation. So if, for example, you're working on the launch of a new product, or you're managing the reputation of an organization, visualize how that might look, not just 6 months from now, but 3 years, 5 years, or even 10 years from now. You know, I can only imagine the fun that the PR people at Ford or GM are having, you know, introducing a new electric truck. That's got to be totally cool. But imagine them thinking about, what will that electric truck look like or be like 10 years or 15 years or 20 years from now? Where are we going with that? That's got to be totally cool. If you're having difficulty comprehending that, start with the familiar. For example, if you're building robots that could someday work in an office, you might want to visualize a robot that looks, acts, and talks like me and you. Welcome to Yang Yang, the robot being developed by Shenghui Industries in Shanghai, your potential future workmate. Here's another example. If you're wondering about the impact of automation, and I kind of brought this up earlier, look at the shopping experience you are having today. You know, the holiday season is coming up. Some of us are not all going to be ordering everything through Amazon. Some of us still like to shop for those gifts, actually going to a store. Well, imagine what the future of a Target or a Walmart or a Costco will look like 10 years from now or 15 years from now. Will, for example, all those holiday gifts actually be delivered by drone one day, or by a automated delivery car with a robot in it, an android? Something to think about. Futurists such as Gray Scott have told me that they are constantly searching for the latest in scientific research. This goes back to that curious mindset. For example, Scott told me, for example, that he came across a study years ago about Chinese scientists successfully cloning monkeys. And that only has led him to think about if we can clone monkeys, we're not that far away from cloning humans. Good bet to go to Google Scholar for the latest scholarly articles. So let's talk about applying a futurist mindset to your work. What do we do? As PR professionals, we build relationships, we manage reputations and brands, we facilitate dialogue. You know, we create and share communications, the stories of a customer, you know, the stories of an organization, their whys, why they built something. And at the end of the day, we are here to drive action. We're here to get somebody to purchase something, to vote, to donate, to go to a certain school, you know, We're here to drive action. Professional futurists use a model very similar to the planning model that we use in the world of PR, except in this case, there's an added step. After conducting their research, they focus on envisioning possible futures, followed by outlining solutions and then creating actionable plans. This is a model that is used by many city planners. Many cities across the country employ, they call them urban planners, but they're futurists. The city of St. Paul, I live in a suburb of St. Paul, recently issued a plan that envisions the future of St. Paul in the year 2040. So imagine applying this kind of process to your work. Maybe not, 20 years from now, maybe 5 years from now. When we think about framing possible issues, we need to look at a number of possibilities. We need to consider past futures. And for most of us, this is very easy to do. We look at what the company has done in the past, or oftentimes we want to repeat it because that's how we've always done it before. However, what's worked in the past may not work now, or the conditions may have completely changed. Remember when the Berlin Wall was torn down just 30 years ago? Take our rising sea levels. Sea levels have been inching up since the 1880s with the rise of the Industrial Revolution in Europe and the United States. So based on this pattern, it's highly likely that we will continue to see rise in the future. Okay, the future is often in plain sight. Another example, imagine the implications of what would happen to your business or your client's business if the combustion engines were banned from our roads, or what will happen if you work for an agricultural commodities business if China completes its ambitious Belt and Roads initiative, connecting not just China with its nearby neighbors, but all connecting China directly with Europe and Africa. Then we need to consider long-term futures, truly worst case and best case futures. What may occur years from now? For example, it's been proposed that we should build the world's largest solar farm in the Sahara Desert to power not only Northern Africa, but Europe too. And this is not a silly idea. Europe is beholden to Russia for natural gas and oil. There's a reason Europe is very concerned and very interested in an idea like this. Finally, as part of our visioning process, we need to identify the future that we would most like to see, and we identify action steps to help us get there. As we do our communications planning, we need to consider a variety of changes. These are what we call drivers of change in the world of futures. Such changes could be technological changes, political changes. For example, we just had a $1.2 trillion bill signed the other day for new infrastructure, right? That's going to have a huge impact on US infrastructure over the next several years, right? That's a political change. There's regulatory changes. A regulatory change might be the US mandating the banning of combustion engines by the year 2035. That's a big change. There might be social changes, generational changes, economic changes. We're experiencing an economic change right now, rising inflation. We haven't experienced rising inflation for a long, long time. So a lot of people are kind of freaking out about it right now. But inflation has always been a part of our US economy. Environmental change. We're experiencing environmental change right now. I live in Minnesota. The city of Duluth, 2 hours away from me on the shores of Lake Superior, has been identified as an ideal climate haven. We already have Californians, and you can look this up, you can Google this. We already have people migrating from states like California to Duluth to escape the wildfires and other climate and environmental changes. And what's the big deal about that? Duluth has fresh water, Lake Superior, okay? It has affordable homes. It's close to a major metropolitan area like Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's a great place to raise kids. That's why people are thinking about moving there. Well, what happens when more than 16 million people need to move from, say, Florida or Texas or California to escape rising sea levels? That's a possible future ahead for us. Environmental change is a big factor that all of us need to consider for the future. Let me give you a real life example that I've been involved with. So one of my former clients, Transport America, they have been merged with another company now. We came across one of these driving factors of change that was affecting morale among truck drivers several years ago. So we've been hearing about these electric vehicles, right? Electric cars. Well, Tesla has come out with electric 18-wheelers, right? And in fact, my client at that time, Transport America, they actually had bought one to start experimenting with it. Just seeing that on the lot got truck drivers talking, right? So American trucking companies are already having a hard time attracting truck drivers. In fact, the average trucking firm experiences a turnover of 80% per year. Employing electric trucks may be driven by a remote operator someday, maybe somebody who doesn't have to be actually behind the wheel. That's in the future. It's a probable future. Now, they might be at least 15 years away, but truck drivers today are already worrying about that future, and it's preventing some from entering into the field. So the communications challenge is educating drivers and customers that the reality of driverless trucks is a long ways away, and emphasizing the value of new technology in increasing safety and cost savings today, okay? So our client, Transport America, we did a brand refresh for them, the trucking company that's changing trucking. And, as a communicator, we were all about helping this company be a leader instead of a follower, and embracing new technologies. But at the same time, remember I talked about having that empathetic mind as part of a futures mindset. We also had to be empathetic to today's truck drivers and what their fears are, what their feelings are, okay? A big part of this is thinking through your communications and how a change can affect every part of an organization. Communications, marketing, legal, human resources, operations, sales. It affects everything. The key is not assuming that everybody is thinking the same, along the same lines. It's not assuming that everybody has the same fears or the same questions, okay? It's important to ask questions and to listen to people, like listening to key customers. I, personally spoke to this truck driver and his wife about their fears about driverless trucks and electric trucks. And having these conversations helped me to create better communications and communicating a future for Transport America. Okay. So it's important that we check our assumptions and our biases. Trends. Another important part of communications, we all deal with we all lean on trends to do our communications from time to time, right? And I'd like you to be careful of using trends. Often we're identified in the world of communications of identifying trends or positioning our companies around trends or riding the wave of trend, but trends can be a distraction too, okay? It's important that we, as futurists, we recognize patterns, but we are careful to avoid the fads, okay? It's also important to realize there are times when it's important to take a stand when we see lasting change emerging, okay? I'd like to give you another example. For my client, Altig, they're a big engineering firm. They have offices across the country. We're incorporating futures thinking into just about all of their communications. We're doing podcasts where we're speaking about future trends in infrastructure and energy. When we did an employee profile about a transmission engineer, we talked to him about his futurist mindset. We speak about employing a futures mindset in the hiring and the retention of engineers for the company. We're using a futures mindset in all of the communications that we're doing, okay? So if you're looking for, hey, Stephen, what's a great place for me to start in terms of getting a futures mindset going in my organization or for my clients, I would invite you to just sit down with your clients and start talking to them about the future of their industry and what trends do they see happening. We often talk about thinking outside the box. Instead, in thinking through a challenge at work, ask yourself, what if this box was bigger? What if we advocated for the change in regulations to allow us to reach more customers? What if the box was smaller? What if we were to focus on a smaller niche within the marketplace? What if we smashed this box by introducing game-changing technology? Look at how Uber has changed the game of transporting people. Please keep this in mind. Communicators play a critical role in all of this. Why? We've been entrusted in maintaining and building trust. And trust is the oil, even though I just think using that word is so funny as we look at the future. Trust should be the hydrogen that makes organizations work better. As your organization navigates the changes ahead, you will need to trust more than ever. Trust not only allows an organization to sell more efficiently, but trust allows your organization to have more leverage in working with influencers, such as regulators who can change the size of your box. And I'd like to share with you the warning letter from Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock. BlackRock is a huge investment firm. They have over maybe $7 trillion under management, $1 trillion. And he published these comments for CEOs of public and private companies. Society is demanding that companies, both public and private, serve a social purpose. To prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but they must show how they make a positive contribution to society. Companies must benefit all of their stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, customers, and the communities that they operate. You know, when I got into PR, this to me is very fundamental to me. It takes somebody like this to remind other company CEOs about the importance of what we're doing, the importance of serving others. Marsha Lindsay, who founded Lindsay Stone and Briggs, for you folks in Madison, I grabbed this quote that she shared a couple of years ago. When you have a vision for the future, you get very excited about enacting it in your organization. And then you get really frustrated that others don't see what you see because you forgot to bring them along. And I think that's an important thing that we as communicators need to do. when we're thinking about the future, when we're building plans, we need to remember to bring others along, including those customers, including those employees, like those truck drivers. So what should you do now? Prepare for the next 20 years. First step, make a career plan. The changes are going to be fast and furious. Put on that oxygen mask. You need to have a career plan to think, for the next 10, 20, 30 years, especially if you've only been in this business for a few years, you got to have a plan. Don't assume you're going to retire at 65 anymore. You might retire at 50. You might retire at 90. If you knew what you were going to live to 100, would you want to retire soon? What do you really want to do with your life, with your productive life? What's your bucket list? I encourage anybody to make a bucket list. This is from our financial planner, Ruth Hayden, and she breaks out a bucket list like this. I just scribbled it down here. What do you want to accomplish in the next 6 months, the next 18 months, the next 36 months, the next 75 years, and put down your age and the year that it will occur, okay? So imagine your age and the year and what you want to do. It's a really great exercise, and do it with if you're in a loving relationship with somebody, do it with your partner or your spouse. Do it separately and then compare notes. It's really interesting. My wife and I have done this, and it's a great way of starting for yourself to think like a futurist for yourself. New technology is going to be hitting us left and right. Many of us didn't know how to do Zoom, a couple years ago. Now we're all Zoom experts, right? Well, you're going to need to keep up on the technology. Virtual reality, the metaverse, conducting meetings in the metaverse, cryptocurrencies, big data, coding. These are just some of the technologies that are here now, but will be more predominant in the years to come. Video. I would tell anybody right now entering the PR profession, become an expert at telling stories with video in multiple formats, from social media to YouTube to whatever next is coming. Find yourself a reverse mentor if you're struggling. This is my niece Roz, and she studied blockchain technology at UW-Madison, and she is now working as a freelance blockchain consultant. She is one of these people who works from anywhere. She likes just moving around the country, finding cool places to live, and that's what she does. She's a total Gen Zer, and she is my reverse mentor on all things cool technology like cryptocurrencies and blockchain. So go find somebody like that. Travel more. I think that in the years to come, we need to travel more to learn about other people, other cultures, other problems facing our world, because we are all connected. When I talk about sea level rise, and migration, there are entire countries like Bangladesh that are in danger of being completely underwater. Those people need to go somewhere, and they will. Parts of Latin America, Central America, they're going to be dramatically affected by rising global temperatures. They're going to have to move. There will be some places in this world one cannot live anymore. And so it's best for us to understand these places and these people and learn where, how they think and what their cultures are. I think more importantly, we should all learn about China. They are going to be a superpower. They will rival us in the US. They already are trying to. There's a chance we might have a war with them. And we should I think it's in our interest to really understand these folks and how they think and how they view us, okay? And we shouldn't just give lip service to it anymore. We should really try to understand other nations and their motivations. You know, I also believe as part of this process, you should give yourself permission to experiment. How many of you have bought cryptocurrency? I've gone on to like Coinbase and bought like a teeny percentage of Bitcoin, for example, or one of the other cryptos. Try it. Try using that crypto to buy something. It's a good experiment to have, okay? Keep working on your soft skills, your empathy, your communication, your presentation. These are skills that the androids cannot easily duplicate. The bottom line is little investments over time pay off. And now is the time, if you think you're not going to be on a beach and you'll still be working 15 years from now, to keep investing in yourself. Go get that master's degree. Go get those certificates. Go try something new. There may be many futures ahead, but it's your story to write. If you're really passionate about something, do something about it. What are you waiting for, is my message to you. Transformation. I believe we actually are entering a world of transformation, and that we have an opportunity to affect that future. It can't be a world of winning at all costs anymore. We need to be all intentionally curious about each other, ourselves, and our planet, and we need to all unite and work together to, make our planet a better place. We're going to be adding approximately 2 billion people to our planet within the next 30 years. We need to understand now how we're going to care for those extra 2 billion people with fewer resources, possibly much less water, maybe less clean air. It's up to us to start figuring that out now. So, how you choose? Will you leap forward or will you choose to be left behind? That's the mindset that I'm talking about. Change is here. It's all around us. Now is the time to start looking forward, thinking ahead, and what action you personally will take to change the future. So that's the end of my presentation. If I would appreciate it if you have, Drew said you're going to get a survey. Appreciate it if you could fill that out. If any of you ever want to have a virtual coffee, maybe someday a coffee in person whenever this pandemic is finally over with, I'd love to do that. If you have questions about a futures mindset, please feel free to contact me. And by the way, this is my daughter. I brought her up a little bit earlier. Yep, she's still training for Mars. She did an internship up in the Northwest Territories on an organic farm. My suburban daughter learned how to clean chickens and feed yaks and how to live in a very, very cold place, but very warm with lots of dogs. And by the way, I do have a futurist checklist, 10 tips to prepare your career for 2030. If you'd like that, you can email me. Happy to share it with you. And you can also visit my blog, stephendupont.co, for more great articles about future thinking. And here's my contact information. So thank you again for letting me share this with you. And I would be happy to take any questions. I'm going to turn this off and turn my video on and turn on the chat. And if anybody has any thoughts, you're more than welcome to share with me, and I'll take a few minutes here to share. Okay. Hey, Drew, good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Okay, great. And I'll just quick go through here about some of the comments, and anybody have any questions? Thank you, Karina, for your thought. Very thought-provoking. I appreciate that. Here's a comment. I'm most hopeful about our ability to directly connect with members of our audience. I'm most afraid of the competing versions of truth that seem to be becoming more prevalent as mass communication is democratized. So
I was answering your question near the beginning.
It looks like she was, yep. If anybody else have any other questions, you can, if you'd like to turn on your microphone and ask, go ahead. Or if you'd like to put something in the chat. Oh, hi, Candy. A number of people are very anti-global. How do we encourage them to think about other cultures? That's a great question. And, I think the best remedy for that is travel, and I think traveling within our own country to see different cultures within our own country, traveling right across the border to Canada or to Mexico, you don't have to go very far to experience other cultures. But I think that really is, to me, the best remedy for that. And I think you have to have the mindset of being willing to travel. And I can just tell you, I grew up in a family where my father refused to travel. He did not like traveling anywhere, and that greatly affected me. I love traveling today. I love traveling in many different places, and I think that that's kind of, that travel has led me to where I am today about thinking about futures. So, any other questions? Well, I think with that, why don't we call it a day? Thank you again, everybody, for joining me for this presentation. I hope you got a lot out of it. And I hope, more importantly, I got you to think a little bit differently. And I will recommend this one book to you, The Art of the Long View. It's a really great book. Out of all the books I'd recommend, I'd start there. Easy book to get. And if you are really worried about climate change, this is an incredible book, Falter. So recommend that too. So thanks, folks. Drew, do you have any things to wrap up?
Just wanted to say thank you, Stephen, for that great presentation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Hope you attend more of our Midwest District Conference sessions. We still have a lot of great content to come.
All right, folks. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Have a good afternoon.